This episode of The Dog Show features Ryan Tate. Ryan is a highly accomplished animal trainer who has worked professionally with species from leopard seals to zebra finches. He's also the author of the book How to Train Your Dog, the complete guide to raising a confident and happy dog. The majority of Ryan's time is spent training biosecurity and conservation dogs to preserve our environment. He is also an animal behaviour consultant to various zoos and agencies around Australia, holding qualifications in dog training, zookeeping, and marine science. In the interview, we discuss scent detection dogs, including the applications of scent detection in the real world and how to train your dog to detect scent. Ryan, welcome to the Dog Show today. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Will.
Yeah, we were just chatting before we got on air. You've kind of in between places. You're playing back home. Kind of got taken over by fog or something like that. So you've found a nice little spot to have the conversation.
Regular Wi-Fi, yeah, and a quiet room, yeah.
That's good. I'm really excited to talk to you today because we're going to talk about something which I don't know anything about, which is scent detection and training dogs to detect scent. But before we dive into that content, I want to hear a bit more about your background. So I understand you've got an array of different dogs with all sorts of different skills and different breeds at home. So do you want to tell me a bit more about them?
Yeah, sure. So at home at the moment, we've got 6 dogs there, and we have, I've made a fool of myself, 7 dogs there at the moment. So starting from the beginning, we have our oldest dog is a Shetland sheepdog by the name of Finn, who are also known as a Sheltie, and he is primarily used for dog reactivity consultation. So he's a very calm, very non-threatening looking sort of dog that we can use for other reactive and fearful dogs to be in the peripheries, and for them to usually, that'll be their first positive experience with a dog, would be a dog like Finn. Then we have our Belgian Shepherd or Belgian Malinois by the name of Rafa, who also works with Finn on dog reactivity, and they also work in a space called the Cynophobia Clinic, where people with phobias of dogs are treated. And Rafa, being a Malinois, is the other end of the spectrum to Finn. So for people and dogs that are scared of other dogs, you meet a Shetland sheepdog and then you go through a variety of Spaniels and Labradors and Beagles. Rafa is probably what most dogs and people would consider to be a very threatening looking kind of dog. He's big, black face, pointy ears, and also a very, very well trained biosecurity detection dog. Then we leap into all our Spaniels. We have Taylor, our 5-year-old English Springer Spaniel, who was last year named the Royal Agricultural Society Hero Dog of the Year for her work during the bushfires, where she located over 30 injured koalas during the fires. And she also finds a variety of other different animals as well. And Connor is another Springer who's trained on a variety of invasive plants. Then another Springer by the name of Dash, she's only 1. She's my second youngest dog, and she's working on some very nasty invasive weeds for biosecurity purposes around the state at the moment. And then we have 2 very gorgeous little black working cockers, very light, very small, very intense little dogs that serve very much the same detection purposes as the Springers, but they do everything in a smaller scale. So they're easier to get in and out of tight spaces. They do very small search patterns. They're nice and non-threatening looking, so you can get a lot of work done without making people afraid or worried about the dog. So their names are Sally and Scout. And Scout's only 10 weeks old, and she's full of beans and, little cockers, mate. There's just what's not to love about them. They're delightful and they work really hard.
I'm assuming it's not, just by chance that you've got the Springer Spaniels. They're obviously better at scent detection than other dogs, or?
Yeah, look, so you can teach, this is what I love about the topic, you can literally teach any dog to find anything, right? It does not really matter. In the scale of comparing the human's nose to the dog's nose, when we talk about what dog is best, it's not really that their nose is exponentially better than another dog breed. It's that they have a higher desire to do the task. So usually what I'm looking for requires lots of stamina from the dogs and a very, very low likelihood of them actually finding it. So the Springers are very, very happy to search for huge periods of times without a genuine find. Now, they also happen to be a very trustworthy dog off lead, and they're non-threatening looking. So in terms of a dog that wants to search for hours and hours on end, is not threatening to wildlife or people, and is trustworthy off lead, you really can't go past the Springer and their just desire to perform the task. They're nowhere near as bright as, say, a shepherd, but obviously with the aesthetics of the dog and their ability to move through an environment in different landscapes without disturbing places, the Springers come in really handy as opposed to our shepherds, which we love too.
Can you kind of just explain what you mean when you were talking about biosecurity, scent
Yeah,
detection, and that kind of stuff, or like some examples of how you're using these dogs to find things? You mentioned the koalas. I'm assuming that's after bushfires and things like that. Just give me a bit more detail about what you're talking about.
yeah. So look, my business, we've got 6 handlers and a variety of dogs, and some of those handlers and contractors have their own dogs. And the main 2 areas that we focus in is biosecurity and what we would call conservation dogs. So the biosecurity dogs are usually taken to locations where there's either a high risk of something coming into Australia or into the state or into a sensitive region, and we want to prevent that thing from coming into the area, or perhaps it is in the area and we need to track that down. So that might be something like a cane toad on an island off the coast, or it might be an invasive plant or insect that has come in on cargo undetected and has taken to life somewhere in New South Wales on a farm or on a private property or state forest or something like that. And we'll train up the dogs under pretty strict timeframes and pretty strict conditions to hunt out that very specific target. And that's what the basis of what we call our biosecurity dogs. That's their primary functions, is to hunt out those sort of things that are either really difficult for humans to spot, or perhaps are cryptic, so they might be hidden in trees and in understory, and that's where the dog's sense of smell can be a really useful part to the whole biosecurity response. And then the other, not necessarily side of the spectrum, but the other area of dogs we have are our conservation dogs, which are generally used to help find threatened species. So things like the koala, or other endangered animals, or animals that are native to Australia and need to be conserved, or we want to do really accurate population assessments of them through certain areas. The dogs are, again, great at finding things that are difficult to spot. So koala poo, for example, looks a lot like a lot of poo in the bush, and it's really hard to spot. But luckily for the dogs, nothing else really smells like koala poo. So once we train the dogs to find koala poo or koala fur or koala urine, the dogs do it incredibly quickly. And it is, for koalas, by far the most effective and accurate and efficient method of finding them, particularly in low numbers or in areas that have been burnt or affected by natural disasters. There is no faster tool than a dog. Now, drones and thermal imaging is starting to catch up, but no one method is perfect. So when we can work dogs with people, with drones, with spotlighting and thermal imaging, we can do really amazing things and really fast responses in natural disasters or in areas where animals like the koala need help.
From what I know, I don't think drones can smell. So
No, they can take huge photos of big areas and have algorithms plugged into them that can either spot thermal signatures or spot spectral imaging signatures of plants and animals. So they are just, every year the technology for that space, and I'm a big proponent, I'm a conservationist at my core, of seeing that grow alongside the dogs. And, those 2 spaces seem to be, when we look at biosecurity and conservation, the dogs and the drones and the cameras, they sort of seem to be, really just every year one-upping each other, and we're learning more about them and getting better and better results.
how far away from a scent would a dog need to be to actually, identify it?
So the spaniels are the best at what we say acquiring an odor. So that means they can work through an environment in a very smooth fashion, moving left and right in front of the handler and moving the same way. And that's when we know the dog hasn't made odor or hasn't acquired odor of anything yet. What we see in the dog when they acquire odor is a change in behavior, or just noticeable difference, where the dog will suddenly stop and change very suddenly, and the intensity of their search pattern will change very, very dramatically in an instance until they work to the actual source of the smell. So from the moment that they've acquired the odor to finding the actual source of the smell, for my dogs personally, the best we've seen is about 120 meters on their targets. Now, most of their targets are what we would call low odor, so lower odors, maybe a single koala or some scats. And we've definitely seen them at about 100, 120 meters pretty reliably go, "Oh, I know that smell," and then go left, right, really intense search pattern, bang, here it is sitting at the base of this tree. And similarly with rats and other small mammals that we've been looking for, around that 100 and 120 meter mark, depending on the environmental conditions. So your wind direction, your humidity, the cloud cover, temperature, all of that will influence how the scent molecules will move through the environment. So everything essentially on Earth is in a constant state of sublimation or evaporation. And that's putting molecules into the air that the dog's olfactory system will grab and analyze at a much greater ability than we can. And the dog can then decide, okay, where is that coming from, and work in on that.
This is probably taking a step back, but how did you get into all of this? Did it start with the
Yeah.
love for dogs? Did it start with the love for science and the environment? Like, how did you get into it?
Yeah, it's a funny. I was just literally telling my Uber driver this story on the way here. So for me, it really started as a love of the environment. So birds and the water was really where my passion for all things nature really kicked off as a child. And as young as I can remember, I wanted to be a marine biologist. So I very much single-mindedly pursued that task from about the age of 10, and got myself into a marine science degree, and went on to study zookeeping and became a zookeeper at Taronga Zoo. And then eventually I headed up the marine mammal department there, and oversaw marine mammal training and marine mammal research. Got to go to Antarctica and Kangaroo Island and all these beautiful places, working with seals and penguins and sharks and turtles and fish. And that was a 12-year career. But during that career, I always had a love for dogs, always had dogs, and was dabbling in agility and obedience and a bit of private dog training on the side. And the fire didn't really get lit within me until I met a group of dog handlers from the Australian Defence Force who were doing explosive detection dogs, and their stories and their relationships with their dogs just really lit a fire within me. And then I stayed in close contact with them. We did some handler exchanges, and we spent time with them, and vice versa. And then I met a lot of police officers we did the same sort of thing with the cops. And then I met a bloke by the name of Steve Austin, who was training dogs to find penguins. And Steve really pioneered biosecurity and conservation dogs in Australia. So just meeting all these amazing characters, I sort of knew that as amazing and as sexy as that whole marine mammal world was for me, that I felt like I had a calling to go in that direction. So then I went and I did a bunch of different dog training courses at TAFE and studied some courses under Steve and his wife Vicky, and just chipped away at it, and essentially worked double time for many, many years doing odd dog jobs, till it got to the point where I felt really complete in what I'd achieved within the zoo world and with marine science, and felt like there was some amazing opportunities in the world with dogs. And around that time my first child was born, 6 and a bit years ago. You think you should be playing it safe. That really encouraged me to take a leap and follow my dreams. Instead of playing safe with a job that I always knew, I wanted to go forth and try something new. So I left the zoo and kicked off into the dog world, and I was doing truffle dogs and narcotic dogs. And at a demonstration that I was doing at a Dogs Day Out event, I met some people from national parks who were doing weed work with dogs, and volunteered in a program there, and just one thing led to another. And here I am. That's all I do. I find weeds and find animals with people from national parks and other similar organisations.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of different pieces in your background that kind of all just led down this path. Do you feel like you've taken a lot from that time as a zookeeper and everything like that, and potentially learning behaviour of other types of animals and how that's related to dogs?
Oh, absolutely. And I, in that time at the zoo, I was really lucky to work with a wide variety of species. and a lot of time with birds. And within dog trainers, there is a lot of respect for people that can transition between something like a bird and something like a dog, where they're so different in the way that the fundamentals around how you have to handle them, that once you can start to see those similarities and you can transition between species like that, you feel quite whole as a trainer, and you feel that I can take on almost anything. And certainly that zoo world, they are somewhat controlled environments, but when you're working with free flight birds and you don't have a lead, you can't deliver corrections, you're really relying on your ability to utilize reinforcement well and to understand your animal and use approximations to get the best out of these animals. So it certainly allowed me to have a great understanding of the importance of understanding your animal and understanding the rewards that are going to suit them. And as well, detection dogs, we want them kind of wild. We don't want them fully tamed, because we're relying on a sense that they have a natural instinct that they have that we don't understand. So for me, working with birds and sea lions, and then transitioning to these dogs that we want to be a bit crazy and a bit wild, it's actually a really nice, smooth transition where I feel super comfortable with those crazy firecracker dogs that often drive other handlers mad. I go, this is my jam. This is where I feel comfortable. I like those dogs that just feel like they're on the verge of chaos at all times, and where things could go pear-shaped. That's where I feel really happy and comfortable.
So you've spoken, touched on a few different things like scent detection for explosives and in the police force, and obviously you've spoken about biosecurity and those type of things. How does scent detection relate to your average dog owner? Like, how is it applicable in the real world?
Well, when it comes to developing a program for let's say you've got a dog that's a mess, right? A pet dog that's an absolute mess, and it's anxious, it's reactive, it might be underweight or overweight, and it's phobic of everything. We want to do whatever we can to make that dog feel good and feel powerful before we start to tackle their triggers head on, right? And the dogs see the world through their nose. It's their primary function. And if you want to make that dog feel good, you want to connect with that dog, by asking that dog to use its nose to do some really simple things, like holding a treat under their nose, throwing it into some grass in your backyard and saying, find it, mate. Have the dog run after their treat, sniff it out in some long grass and eat it, and have you crouch down and praise them like they're the best dog in the world. That's one of the best building blocks to getting that dog to feel powerful and feel a little bit of control in their environment and build some trust with their owner or with their handler or their family or whoever it may be. So we love that we have trainers in our team that specifically work with reactivity and fear, aggression, and complex dogs in their home. And we always try and include a little bit of scent detection in that dog's life to make that dog feel good. And doesn't matter whether you got a pug, a border collie, a Shih Tzu, or a Schnauzer, they all will enjoy using their nose in some way, shape, or form. And we can modify those games in a number of different ways of complexity based on the dog's desire and ability to build a relationship and give the dog some functional tasks that might get a bit of exercise out of the dog or might teach the dog a new skill using their nose.
So what you're saying is it's kind of a core skill or a core process you can go through with your dog, which will help with other parts of their issues, potentially behavioural issues.
Absolutely. And, you and I were talking about it before we went live, but I did some work for the ABC on Catalyst where we took 3 average dogs. And, when I say average, I mean, they were completely untrained dogs, and put them on a 2-week crash course of scent detection, just taught them how to find one thing. So one dog was finding a set of keys. The other one, the Chihuahua, was finding a mobile phone, and the Schnoodle was finding the daughter's wallet. And that's all we did for 2 weeks, literally nothing else. We said, how can we train the dogs to find these things? And the owners did all the training. I was their mentor that supported them through it. At the end of the 2 weeks, every single one of those dogs had a better recall. They had more drive in everything they were asked to do. They looked to their owner for instructions, and the number of measurable behaviors associated with anxiety or stress, particularly in the Chihuahua, went down exponentially. The dogs were visibly so much more connected to their owner and content within themselves by learning one task. So it's not hocus pocus. It is really about giving the dog a purpose through something that they know they're great at, which then has a flow-on effect to just the dog feeling good, having little oxytocin hits and endorphin hits that transfer onto the owner, and the owner feels good and they transfer that back onto the dog, and suddenly everyone's feeling bloody great because we're just playing a silly game of scent detection instead of all day going, stop that, come here, knock that off, stop barking, get outside, get off the couch. Suddenly we start saying, yes, good dog, thank you, wow, I'm proud of you, and looking at the dog and lighting up. And that's addictive. That feels bloody great.
Yeah, it's not nice having that always negative vibe around something
Yeah.
your dog's doing. I'm sure that everyone, including me and my wife, could use a dog looking for our keys every now and then as well.
Oh, mate, it saved my skin once or twice, that's for sure.
So how do you train a dog to detect scent then? How does it all begin?
So, look, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and any trainer that says this is the only way to do it, in my mind, is probably being a little bit showing a bit of disservice to how amazing dogs are, because there is lots of ways to do it, and you can start with just literally teaching the dog to find treats in a varying degree of distracting environments, or you can go straight to the source, which is what I normally do. So whatever we want to train the dog to find, I go to a very, very boring environment. We have a shed at our property where it's polished concrete floors and nothing else is happening. And I take the dog in there by myself, flick the lights on, make sure the dog's in a happy, calm state. And whatever the source is, I place it in the middle of the room on the ground. It might be in a jar. It might be just sitting there by itself. And I literally place it in the middle of the room. I let the dog be free. And as soon as the dog gets within a meter of it, I'll mark it, usually saying the word good or yes. And then I will reward the dog with its favorite reward. It might be the tennis ball. It might be a treat. It's going to be something the dog loves. And we essentially do physical target training with something the dog can see.
I like that. So you're eliminating everything initially, just so it's a really focused environment for the dog.
Super, super easy. And we've repeated this process so many hundreds and hundreds of repetitions and times with different dogs over different workshops all around the country. And we know it works, providing that your starting place is a suitably quiet environment. So the part where the wheels fall off is when humans try and take the dog into an environment that is too distracting for the dog and try and generalize that process. So dogs are poor generalizers. They don't generalize positive experiences to different locations very well. And that's where a good trainer will, thrive, is they know when to push the dog outside that environment. They know when to bring distractions into that environment. And, going from my shed to the middle of Kosciuszko National Park is a bloody big leap. And there's a lot of steps between that. So those first processes in the shed, that's pretty easy. Anyone can do that. But knowing when to then say, righto, I'm going to add in chickens, I'm going to add in sheep, I'm going to add in other dogs and people and children and food and other poo and whatnot, and have the dog work in amongst all that. That's where the science and the art of training detection dogs sort of come together. And you do need to go off that gut instinct a little bit.
Yeah, so how long does that take? How gradual is that process from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage however many there are?
Look, if you gave me a perfect 1-year-old dog of any variety that is green and untrained, I could probably have it pretty close to field proficient within, say, 2 months, 3 months. But, perfect 1-year-old dogs don't exist. They're not available. They're in someone else's home having a bloody wonderful life. So I usually get puppies at 8 weeks of age. And my female dogs, particularly the springers and the cockers, usually by the time they're 1, they're getting pretty good. The boys, 18 months to 2 years before they're reliable. If you have a job where perhaps the environment is somewhat controlled and not overly distracting, or maybe the dog's working on lead perhaps, you can get them out there a bit younger. But for a dog working off lead and working around wildlife and stock and people and cars and roads and stuff, for a puppy, you're looking close to a year before you're going to have anything substantial.
And that's daily kind of
Yeah, mate.
reinforcement, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, my days for a puppy at the moment would be they must go every day and do some form of socialization or environmental experience. So, they might go and meet different wildlife. They might go to airports or shipping yards once a day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes or whatever. We need to tick that off. Then we would work on play. So getting the handlers to play with the dogs. That might be a few minutes broken up throughout the day, playing fetch, playing tug, just building a relationship. A bit of obedience, 5-10 minutes here and there of obedience, and then working on detection, which is ironically probably the smallest part of the dog's day in terms of time. And, if you do that, you're probably only looking at a cumulative a couple of hours of work a day, but 5 days a week, just chipping away at that for a dog over the space of 12 months, managing them well, making sure they're happy, they're well fed, they've got some social companions. You have a pretty amazing dog by the time it's one. This is all I do. This is all my team does.
Yeah.
Our lives are dedicated to these dogs, and we're pretty good at it. And so the dogs end up, pretty spectacular by the time they're one. But it's not huge amounts of time. If you think the average pet owner, might walk their dog for an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, or maybe half an hour. If they broke up that time into a bit more training and a bit less latte sipping at the dog park, I'd be amazed at when they bond with their dog and try and train them something. My first few dogs, I did not have that amount of time to put into them, and they were spectacular dogs. One was a world record holder, and the other one had lots of trials and amazing tricks and behaviors under his belt. And it was just about, I wanted to engage more with the dog before and after work. Then I wanted the dog to run around like a headless chook at the dog park while I chatted to my mates. And I think that's where people can see huge results, is just by using their time a little bit more effectively with their dog.
It's interesting. I never thought of it that way, replacing some of the just mindless walking time with training time, because they're still getting stimulation and exercise from
Yeah.
that. It's a great way to look at it.
And what we used to do with our dogs, particularly, once they're heading towards maturity, is that you'd go for your walk, and then just halfway along the walk, you just go, I'm just going to stop at this little park here, and I'm going to do some recalls, I'm going to do some spins, I'm going to do some weaves between my legs. And the dogs just think the walk's just gone from being great to bloody amazing, because we're adding in some problem solving, we're taking high value treats and some cool toys, and the walk becomes, so much more than just a walk and a sniff, which is, don't get me wrong, still super important, but you can spice it up a bit.
It's like stopping in an amusement park on the way home.
Exactly, great analogy. Yeah.
So what about if I dropped my 5-year-old dog off at your house? Is it taking a lot longer to teach them to do the same things?
Not if the dog's well adjusted, not at all, right? So if the dog is confident and has been appropriately socialized and desensitized to the world around them, not at all. A good 5-year-old dog is great. One of my handlers, Steve, just got a very good 3-year-old dog, and who was just not gelling with the handler that previously had him and didn't really know any of the stuff that we wanted the dog to know. And just, yesterday he just ticked off his first job. He'd only been with him for a few months. So yeah, it's just about, the confidence. I think a 5-year-old nervous dog is heaps harder than say a nervous 8-week-old puppy, just because that critical development time and fear just inhibits learning so much. And I suppose over-socialized dogs, a lab or a staffy that's been allowed to just, recklessly socialize for the first 2 years of life, it can be really hard to get that dog to place value on people. And that's probably the other end of the spectrum. So really fearful dogs, or dogs that have just been allowed to recklessly socialize at the dog park as adult dogs, I find them personally the most challenging dogs to work. I can still work with them for sure. But, anything that falls in the middle, I think they're all, pretty similar.
Because they need to unlearn, I guess, a lot of habits if they're on that spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, it's things that have emotional connections. And just like with us, you can learn a new skill immediately, but to change your emotional response to a stimuli, to something that you're scared of or something that you love, or maybe an addiction we might have, that takes time. There's no magic cure for dogs that have a strong emotional response to a stimuli. It does take time.
Cool. So, Ryan, thanks for sharing all those tips about scent detection and your background. I've learned a huge amount on the interview today. Where's the best place for people to go to find out more about what you're doing and scent detection? I know you've got a scent detection course on your website
Yep.
as well.
Yep. So our website is www.tateanimals.com. We've got the usual socials with Instagram and Facebook at Tate Animals. So we've got a lot of lovely short courses online. We have more detailed like membership style courses we call Ryan's Members Lounge, where it's heaps of courses, but informal webinars and things like that. And Jen, my wife, and I just published a book only a few months ago that's in all the major bookstores, How to Train Your Dog, very original title. And that we talk a lot about breed specific activities that people can do through the book, and how important it is to treat your dog as an individual, and what you can do to try and learn about your dog, so then you two can have a better life together and you can have that relationship that hopefully you want with your dog.
Yeah, perfect. Well, wherever anyone's listening, I'm going to share the links to the book, to the website, to all your courses, all the socials as well, so they can check it all out.
Appreciate that a lot. Thanks, Will.
So just one last question. For the scent detection course, I mean, the puppy courses and stuff is somewhat self-explanatory in terms of who would use them, but who do you think is the perfect person to do the scent detection course?
Honestly, the content is absolutely aimed at the entry-level dog owner, but I include enough of the science in that I've had people that have been experienced trainers who've done it and said, hey, I actually learnt quite a bit about that. So I've had people, like really experienced professional handlers do that course and go, wow, that was great, just to hear a different perspective on a topic they already knew about. And probably 90% of the people that have done it have been people that have just done, puppy class with Jen or myself and go, I want to do something fun with my dog. I want my dog to find my keys. And they've done it with, a 9-month-old bulldog or a cavalier. And they're the dogs we love getting the videos of, whippets and cavaliers and bulldogs and pugs and dogs that we wouldn't associate with detection doing, really beautiful jobs around the household. So for those average pet owners with stock standard pet dogs, get into it.
Well, I've got a 5-year-old French bulldog who probably isn't that well trained. So maybe I need to give it a go and can be a case study for that.
You very should. We'll send you a promo code after this, mate. Give you a little discount.
Perfect. Well, Ryan, thanks so much again for coming on the Dog Show. I've had a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me, Will.